A woman will almost never walk up to a man and openly admit that she's attracted to him. That simply isn't how attraction is usually expressed. Instead of making direct declarations, many women communicate interest through subtle body language that often speaks louder than words. The problem is that most men spend so much time worrying about what they should say next that they completely overlook what is already being communicated without a single word. Human beings relied on nonverbal communication long before spoken language became the primary way of expressing emotions, and attraction still follows many of those ancient patterns today. If you learn to recognize those patterns, you'll stop relying on guesswork and begin understanding what is actually happening during an interaction. Studies in nonverbal communication have suggested that women frequently display several signs of interest before a man notices even one of them. By the time many men begin wondering whether she likes them, she may have already been expressing curiosity, comfort, and attraction through her body language for several minutes. These signals are not necessarily hidden. They simply go unnoticed because attention is focused elsewhere. One of the most revealing areas of the body is the hands. While people can consciously control facial expressions, smiles, and even the tone of their voice, the hands often reveal emotional states with far less conscious effort. That is why paying attention to hand movements can sometimes provide valuable insight into how comfortable or interested someone feels. The first signal often appears through the way she touches her hair. Almost every woman has adjusted her hair at some point during a conversation, but there is an important difference between a practical adjustment and one influenced by attraction. When genuine interest begins to develop, her hand may slowly move toward the side of her face or behind her ear before gently sliding down toward her neck or collarbone. The movement is slower, more relaxed, and often lingers for a brief moment rather than ending immediately. This isn't simply about fixing her hairstyle. Psychologists have long associated gentle neck exposure with feelings of comfort and trust because the neck is one of the body's most vulnerable areas. When someone naturally exposes it during a positive interaction, it may reflect that they feel safe in the other person's presence. Observational research on flirting behaviors has repeatedly noted this combination of hair touching and neck exposure among commonly observed courtship behaviors. If you notice this happening repeatedly while the conversation flows naturally, it may suggest that she feels relaxed and emotionally engaged with you. However, the key is to look at the overall pattern rather than treating one gesture as undeniable proof of attraction. The second signal involves something that many men dismiss as meaningless fidgeting. Imagine the two of you sitting together at a coffee shop. As the conversation continues, she begins lightly tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her fingertips, slowly running her fingers along the edge of a menu, playing with the stem of a wine glass, or absent-mindedly moving the strap of her handbag between her fingers. At first glance, it may look like simple nervous energy, but psychologists often describe similar behaviors as forms of tactile displacement. When emotions become stronger, people sometimes redirect the desire for physical contact toward nearby objects because direct touch may feel too forward in that particular moment. Research has shown that these kinds of self-touching and object-touching behaviors often become more frequent when people are around someone they find attractive or emotionally engaging. That doesn't automatically mean every woman who plays with a coffee cup is interested. But when this behavior appears together with prolonged eye contact, smiling, leaning closer, and other positive signs, it becomes much more meaningful. Attraction is rarely communicated through one isolated action. Instead, several small behaviors usually work together to create a consistent picture. The third signal becomes even more noticeable because it involves crossing the boundary of personal space. Physical touch is one of the clearest forms of nonverbal communication because people generally become selective about who they choose to touch. If she lightly places her hand on your forearm while laughing, briefly taps your shoulder while making a point, or gently brushes against your arm during conversation without immediately pulling away, she may be testing how comfortable the connection feels between the two of you. These small touches often serve as a way of measuring your response. Does the interaction remain relaxed? Do you appear comfortable? Do you respond warmly without becoming awkward or overly aggressive? Studies published in social psychology have shown that appropriate, respectful touch can increase feelings of warmth and interpersonal connection when both people are comfortable with it. This is why light, natural touches often appear during successful conversations. They help establish familiarity and emotional closeness. However, it is equally important to remember that respectful boundaries always come first. If touch is not welcomed or reciprocated, the appropriate response is to simply continue the conversation naturally without forcing anything further. The fourth signal is surprisingly easy to miss because it happens during ordinary conversation. Pay attention to the position of her palms. When someone feels guarded, their hands often remain hidden under the table, tucked into pockets, folded tightly across the body, or clenched into closed positions. In contrast, open palms have long been associated with honesty and trust, and openness across many cultures. If she naturally gestures with her palms facing upward while speaking, comfortably rests her hands on the table with relaxed fingers, or hands you something while keeping her palms open instead of closed, she may be expressing a subconscious sense of comfort. Evolutionary psychologists often connect open palm gestures with peaceful intentions because showing empty hands historically communicated that no threat was present. Today, that ancient instinct still influences social interactions. Most people never consciously think about displaying their palms. It happens naturally when they feel emotionally safe. When this openness appears alongside smiling, engaged conversation, relaxed posture, and genuine curiosity about you, it can be another indication that the interaction is moving in a positive direction. Like every other signal, however, it should never be interpreted in isolation. The strongest understanding always comes from observing several consistent behaviors together rather than relying on a single gesture. Asterisk, asterisk. Now let's move into the remaining signals, where the interaction often becomes even more revealing. One of the strongest forms of nonverbal communication happens through hand-to-hand contact. If a woman finds a natural reason to brush her fingers against yours while handing you something, playfully compares the size of your hands, jokingly offers to read your palm, or allows her fingertips to linger for a brief moment instead of immediately pulling away, she may be showing a level of comfort that goes beyond ordinary friendliness. Human hands contain thousands of sensitive nerve endings, making them one of the most responsive parts of the body. Even brief physical contact can create a stronger feeling of connection when both people are comfortable with each other. Many men unintentionally break these moments by reacting nervously, pulling their hand away too quickly, or acting as though the contact never happened. A calm and relaxed response often communicates confidence far more effectively than exaggerated words ever could. The goal is never to force physical contact, but to remain present, comfortable, and respectful whenever natural moments occur. Confidence is usually expressed through calmness rather than urgency. Another interesting behavior involves the wrists. The inside of the wrist is one of the body's more vulnerable areas because the skin is thin and the veins are visible. Throughout evolutionary history, exposing vulnerable body parts has often been associated with feelings of safety and trust. During conversation, you may notice her resting her arms comfortably on the table with the inner wrists facing upward, adjusting a bracelet while allowing her wrist to remain visible, or supporting her chin with her hand in a way that naturally exposes her wrist toward you. Researchers who study nonverbal behavior have noted that these relaxed, open positions frequently appear when someone feels emotionally comfortable in another person's presence. While wrist exposure alone cannot confirm attraction, when it appears alongside prolonged eye contact, smiling, leaning closer, and playful conversation, it may become another valuable piece of the larger picture. Attraction rarely announces itself through one dramatic moment. Instead, it quietly builds through a collection of small, consistent behaviors that gradually create emotional closeness. The seventh signal focuses on mirroring, one of the most fascinating concepts in body language research. Mirroring occurs when two people unconsciously begin reflecting each other's movements, gestures, posture, speaking rhythm, or even facial expressions. If you respectfully touch her forearm while making a point and, a few moments later, she naturally touches your arm in a similar way, that response may indicate a growing sense of comfort and rapport. Likewise, if you lean slightly forward during conversation and she gradually mirrors your posture, or if your speaking pace becomes more relaxed and hers follows naturally. These subtle forms of synchronization often reflect emotional connection. Numerous psychological studies have shown that people who like each other frequently mirror one another without any conscious awareness. This doesn't mean every mirrored movement signals romantic attraction, but it often demonstrates that both individuals are emotionally engaged in the interaction. Paying attention to these responses provides much more reliable information than relying solely on assumptions or wishful thinking. The eighth and perhaps most meaningful signal involves sustained physical contact. There is a significant difference between a brief accidental touch and a touch that intentionally remains for a little longer. If she places her hand on your arm while laughing and leaves it there for several seconds, gently rests her hand on your back while walking together, or comfortably keeps physical contact instead of quickly pulling away, it often reflects a high level of trust and comfort. Sustained touch requires a conscious decision because the person has multiple opportunities to remove their hand but chooses not to. In many cases, this indicates that the interaction has progressed beyond casual politeness into a more personal level of connection. Even then, the appropriate response is never to rush or assume anything. Healthy attraction grows through mutual enthusiasm, respect, and careful attention to each other's comfort. If she seems relaxed and your interest is genuinely reciprocated, continuing the conversation naturally while respecting boundaries is always the best approach. One of the biggest mistakes many men make is believing these opportunities remain available forever. In reality, attraction often changes depending on how the interaction develops. If someone repeatedly expresses warmth, curiosity, and openness while receiving no engagement in return, they might gradually become emotionally distant. You might notice fewer smiles, reduced eye contact, closed body language, shorter answers, or increased attention toward other distractions such as a phone. Rather than assuming the mood changed without reason, it is often helpful to recognize that meaningful conversations require participation from both people. Attraction grows through mutual effort, shared attention, and emotional presence. Responding with genuine curiosity, confident conversation, appropriate humor, and respectful engagement usually creates a much stronger impression than trying to memorize techniques or rehearse lines. When you step back and look at the complete picture, you'll notice that none of these 8 behaviors should ever be treated as absolute proof of romantic interest. A woman may touch her hair because she's adjusting it, gesture with open palms because she's expressive by nature, or briefly touch someone's arm because that's simply part of her communication style. The real value comes from recognizing consistent patterns instead of isolated actions. When several positive signals appear together: engaged eye contact, relaxed posture, genuine smiles, playful conversation, comfortable physical proximity, natural touch, mirrored behavior, and sustained interest, they often create a much clearer understanding of how the interaction is developing. The men who succeed socially are usually not those who memorize every body language signal. They are the ones who remain emotionally calm, pay attention to the other person's comfort, communicate confidently, and allow attraction to develop naturally without pressure. Ultimately, the strongest connections are never built on guessing games. They are built on mutual respect, authentic conversation, emotional intelligence, and the willingness to recognize interest while always respecting the other person's boundaries. Learning to read body language can certainly improve your social awareness, but genuine confidence comes from treating every interaction with patience, kindness, and self-assurance. Those qualities remain attractive long after any single gesture has disappeared, and they are the foundation of relationships that last.